I am very happy to introduce John Van Epp, who is the president and founder of Love Thinks, LLC. Check out their website, mylovethinks.com. Yeah, mylovethinks.com. There's some really great articles and material on there. He is also the author of the book with the wonderful title, How to Avoid Falling in Love with a Jerk. We all need to know this. You can buy that book for 20% off this week only in the campus store. So get your copy tomorrow. John blends in-depth research with humorous stories to provide a map for making healthy relationship choices. He has 25 years of clinical experience and extensive research in premarital, marital, and family relations. And his courses that he's developed have been used and taught in thousands of churches, organizations, educational settings, with the United States Army and across the globe. John has an MA in pastoral counseling and psychology. He has another MA in church history and a PhD in counseling and psychology from University of Akron. John's work and the relationship attachment model that he will be talking more about tonight have been featured widely in such magazines and media outlets as Wall Street Journal, Time Magazine, Psychology Today, O Magazine, and Cosmopolitan. Please join me in giving a big hand to Dr. John Van Epp.
Thank you. What a nice warm welcome. How are you doing tonight? All right, so we're gonna be talking about what I titled "How to Follow Your Heart Without Losing Your Mind," and I titled it this way because the mind or the head and the heart, in many ways, are like the battlefield of love. That's where things get tested out. And in a lot of ways, you know, your head will say things, your mind will say things like, try to figure this person out, and what's going on in the relationship, and what are we supposed to do, and what's the next step, and what exactly is happening. And all the while, the heart is, you know, struggling with different emotions and different feelings and different connections and drama. Any of you ever have any drama in your relationships? Not at Calvin College. No drama. So, you know, I worked with a lot of singles in my private practice. Don't hold it against me. I grew up in Ohio. I know Ohio State's better than Michigan, and it bothers all of you, but that's okay. So. See, that's the way to just kind of ruin it from the first few minutes. I don't live in Ohio anymore. It's exactly right. I now live in Southern California. See, there's a lot more sunshine in Southern California. You say you're from Ohio, and everybody's like, oh, wow. Southern California, they're like, yeah! And that's kind of how my wife and I feel. Yeah! So, lots of taxes. But other than that, you know, you don't want to hear me talk about that. But in my private practice, I worked with a lot of people in their relationships. And I also taught in grad school marriage and family coursework. And I was kind of specialized in what was called marriage and family assessment, like how to figure things out. That's what assessment's all about. A lot of that kind of came into a manuscript that I started to write that incorporated this model as well as research in a body of literature called Premarital Predictors of Marital Outcomes. Believe it or not, there's a number of studies that look at things before marriage and ask, what do we do in life before marriage that predicts outcomes in marriage? Can we predict the quality of marriage? Can we predict divorce? Can we predict infidelity? Can we predict, do any of these things predict? Well, I was actually kind of enamored with all of that research. Plus, you got to understand, I'm counseling people that are trying to navigate their relationships. And I thought, man, if they knew stuff that was predictive, then they could focus on things that at least the scientific world has said is important to look at and to talk about and get to know. So all of that was kind of my background. And you could say in today's language, I felt like people that were navigating their relationships needed some kind of a GPS system. Because most of the social norms and the things that were just kind of like out there, this is how you do a relationship. Here is the pathway. You know, step one, you do this, and step two. Those things had all kind of gone by the wayside, and we'd become very, very individualistic. So that you have a tremendous amount of freedom. You can basically do whatever you want in your relationships, as long as two people are consenting. And there are very few norms. So we talked about at 3 o'clock, for those of you that are there, an article that I found really interesting in the New York Times. It was by a journalist that tried to capture, and he wasn't really looking at college campuses, he was looking at post-college. You know, because the average age of marriage now is around 28, 29 for men and 27 or so for women. So he was looking at, and just understand, in those under the age of 30, only 22% are married now. So 78% of 20-year-olds are not married. And he was looking at this whole culture of relationship stuff post-college, and he wrote an article called The End of Courtship. You ought to just Google it, not now, please, okay? I see some of you like, oh, he told me to Google it. I do whatever I'm told. And but if you just Google it later, The End of Courtship, I think it's Alex Williams. It's really fascinating. It went up to the #1 article in online news sources like Yahoo News and MSN News and things like that. And it just created a tremendous amount of chatter in social media because people were like, yes, there are no more norms. People just do relationships. We're not even sure what is happening in the relationships. We don't even have a common language. So I felt, even before, iPhones and technology had really taken over with the app world, I felt like we need some kind of a guideline, a way for individuals like yourself to make your own kind of GPS of how to navigate a relationship and determine things. So I'm going to give you some of that tonight. I can't give it all to you. It does come out of the book that I wrote that was published by McGraw-Hill. And by the way, I didn't take this pic. A friend of mine just sent it to me. He was in an airport, and he goes, dude, somebody's reading your book. Sends it to me. It was, I don't know, just kind of cool, huh? Yeah. It's the only book that we sold, but it's pretty cool that he found her. So if you like this material, you can read the book, and that'll give you a lot more. Or you can also take an online course. So my oldest daughter, who is right there on the left, is Morgan. She's also a PhD in counseling psych. And she and I did an online course together on all this material. Thought that it'd be helpful. We created little animations to kind of portray some of the things that happen in dating relationships. So it's not just a PowerPoint with a talk behind it. There's a downloadable workbook. And Calvin is a code to get 50% off if you have any interest in that. So we have two websites. One is My Love Thinks, like what you mentioned. But if you want to find this, go to Love Thinks in the top right corner. So just Love Thinks, and you'll find online courses, and you can go there and check it out. Got a lot of good information on our website, so all of that stuff. So is love blind? I mean, that's an old saying, right? So is it true? Is love blind? Well, I'm going to suggest that there is some, do you see how silent you all get? You're like, it's a trick question. He set us up. I know you're all a little paranoid, but come on. No, it's not a trick question. So in some ways, I think love is blind. And so I'm just going to give you a couple reasons why, and then we're going to kind of step into a little more about relationships and building relationships. I think one of the first reasons that love is kind of blind is because God populated the world with jerks, and they're not always obvious. And let me just put a quick disclaimer out there, because this was a Gary Larson Far Side. I don't know, that's way beyond, you were not born when the Far Side was around, but it was a funny comic strip. And it's here God populating and taking jars off the shelf and populating the world, and he grabs a jar of jerks and says, now this is going to make it interesting. So I want to put this disclaimer out there real quickly, because there's some guys in the room, and I know you're sitting there and you're like, oh man, he's going to be slamming on us tonight, you know. There are jerkettes in the world, so just want to equalize things. And I know we're not allowed to be judgmental. We got to be tolerant of everybody, but I just want to say, we don't have to be totally tolerant of people that have jerky-like issues and things. We can confront them and we can talk about them. And being tolerant doesn't mean that you're not being discerning. So you can be a tolerant, accepting person and also have discernment and make good judgments in life and have critical thinking. These two are not opposing. They can go together. And so we'll be talking about how to be good, discerning people. But I want to start with just talking about jerks, because it's kind of fun. And this is a chance. I just want to put down a little bit of a rule. We'll call them difficult partners. When I ask you to shout things out, please don't look at anybody. If you are like bothered by somebody, be like, you know, selfish. You know, just look at me. Just stay focused, all right? So give me some characteristics. Somebody that would be tough to be with in a relationship. That's what we want to think about, just for starters. So what's one thing that makes somebody really tough to be with in a relationship? Egocentric, okay. Go ahead, what's another? Too stubborn. What was that? They want mind readers. Dominating. Manipulative. All right? Controlling. I'm running out of room. It just looks like you've all had some experience in this area. What's a couple other things? What was that? Impatient. And then somebody else said something. Flighty? Clingy. All right, I have no more room, but I do have a lot more paper. So have we exhausted a list of what makes people tough to be within a relationship? Yes or no? No. So I think we got to take a little step back and just be a little humble here. How many of you have been stubborn? Raise your hands. So some of you. How about impatient? And I know some of you didn't raise your hands, and you are actually the liars. So this is what I want to ask. If we've all acted like a jerk now and then, what's the difference between acting like a jerk and being a jerk? So I'm going to put act versus be. Yeah.
Gaslighting. Oh, okay. Like when someone says you did something bad, they were like, no, that never happened.
Oh, okay. They deny it.
Yeah.
All right. So act is recognition. They recognize the issues. And B is they kind of have denial. All right, what else? Difference between acting like a jerk and being a jerk. I can't tell who's... So consistency. Oh, that's getting good. So act is like an incident, and B is consistent, kind of like a pattern. How about one more? Come on, give me good some. Yes. A little bit louder. Oh. So this would be asked for forgiveness, kind of like the remorseful. And the opposite would be, no remorse, I'll say. Well, I don't know if you've ever thought about this. So I'm not going to be bringing a lot of scripture into this and everything, but are there jerks in the Bible? You guys learned that, don't you? How about the word? Is the word jerk used in the Bible? So that's kind of a slang word. But if you look up the word jerk in the dictionary, it is kind of interesting. You know what it says? It says it's a foolhardy person. So does the Bible talk about fools? So I think the first thing that I just kind of want to point out to you is that the Bible doesn't pull any punches to say there are people that are fools. There are people that are just kind of hardened and they're foolhardy and they're not living life in a wise or discerning or circumspect way. So I just want to point out, because I think we live in an era where it's PC to not make any kind of label on anybody. But I just wanted to say, the Bible does point out, and in fact, if you look up the word fool and find all the Hebrew and Greek words that are used, you'll find like hundreds of references. The whole book of Proverbs is differentiating in many ways between those that are fool. But I want to suggest that there's a difference between acting like a jerk and being a jerk that boils down to this. Are you consistently, persistently unwilling to change whatever the issue is? If you don't have any willingness to work on it and to make some kind of a change, then as a result, you can become, labeled as, the fool. Because if you look at the fool, it is a person that is unwilling to address their issues. They don't make changes. And when you're in a relationship with somebody, I think one of the key qualities we need to look at when we're dating somebody is, do they have a willingness to address things in their own life? Like if something bothers me and I put it on the table, how do they deal with it? I don't need somebody that's, willing to sacrifice everything that's important in their life just to please me. I'm not talking about that. But do they have a changeability? I don't think we get taught how to date, what to look for, and what to figure out about a person in that whole process. And I think we would do way better if we had that kind of a roadmap. And part of it is, how do I measure the changeability of a person? Their willingness to address things and make changes. Because that's, iron sharpens iron. If there's anything that's true between my wife and I in almost now a 40-year marriage, is that, we have grown to respect things that each other likes and wants and to make changes. And over the course of life, that just keeps continuing. And her willingness to be thoughtful and willing to change, and my willingness to make changes in order to address each other, is a huge component in a successful marriage. And it's a huge component just in any friendship, right? Yeah, any of you, now, see, I'm afraid to ask this question because some of you might look at people, but don't look at anybody. But have you known another person, they just got this kind of like, they're kind of rigid. They don't make any changes, their way or the highway. That just becomes difficult. So, one reason why love can be blind is because you can get into a relationship with somebody that starts to have some issues that just are masked in the beginning, but then start to make the relationship difficult. That's why there's a kind of a battlefield. The other is your brain kind of goes opposite. It doesn't always help you. So the University of College London did a study along with Helen Fisher. If you've ever read any of Helen Fisher's research, she has a lot of research on the brain and love. Very fascinating stuff. I like a lot of what she's done. But they found that feelings of love led to actually suppression of activity in the frontal lobe. You all remember the frontal lobe is where analytic thinking goes on, right? So if they did a brain scan and you were looking at like math problems or puzzles, the frontal lobe would be, colored in orange and red, like firing on all pistons. But they did that, and then they showed people photos of ones that they felt feelings of attraction and love for, and the frontal lobe started to go dark. So, I don't know, I kind of think it's funny that, your brains betray you. So I'm going to prove that for many people, love has some blind spots to it. And I want everybody to raise their hand if you agree. So if you've had this experience, you know somebody that has been in a relationship or they are in a relationship with a person that has issues, okay? So you know somebody, they're in a relationship with somebody who's got issues, and this person just continues in that relationship. Either they're not addressing it, they're not dealing with it, or they don't even see it. It's one of the three, okay? Either they're not addressing it, or they're not even talking about it, or they see it, but they don't do anything. But they continue in this relationship. Raise your hand if you've ever known anybody like that, and look around. What percentage of hands do we have up? This tells us that people form relationships many times identifying things that are concerning, but the bonds of their heart override the judgment of their mind. The bonds of their heart override the judgment of the mind. And in my private practice for years, I had seen this in Ohio, that this was just so commonplace. People bonded, formed connections of what I called the heart. They formed connections, and they didn't have a good understanding of what to explore, what to talk about, what to look at, and they didn't even know how to address some of those things when they started to surface. They didn't know if they were legitimate concerns or not. So I'm going to try to address some of this and say, listen, we can keep our eyes wide open while we engage our hearts, but not become overly bonded. We can actually be intentional about how we build a love relationship or just a friendship that may have some kind of future involvement. We can do this by keeping our head and our heart working together. So I'm going to introduce this model and tell you that this is a model of relationships. So if you were to define a relationship, what would you say a relationship is? A relationship is, give me a word or two. Say it. Giving. So then I would say, okay, that's an activity that's done in relationships. Good. What other word would you throw out for a relationship? Choice. So there's all kinds of decisions and choices that are made. Very good. Intentionality. So that would be what you would hope people would do in relationships, but not all do. Some just kind of like it is what it is. Go with the flow. Together. So it'd be interesting if you look it up, again on a dictionary, the word that jumps to the forefront is the word connection. So in the 1980s, this will really date me, when I was working on my PhD and I was also working in a clinic doing counseling, I was enamored with this topic of relationships. And what I found was in the research, there was little to no theory of what the specific connectors were that made up this connection we call relationship. So from my counseling and what I was doing there and talking to people, and from my examination, and I started going into the research, I began to see these are 5 major bodies of literature, research, theory about what are called relationship bonds. But they are oftentimes talked about independent of each other. So back then I saw that there was a lot of stuff on trust, and what is trust, and what do you do when trust is broken, and how trust is important, and what biological chemicals in the brain help to foster feelings of trust. And then I found that there were lots of research and books about reciprocity, meeting each other's needs. Any of you are social work majors, there's social exchange theory that was all about how I do this for you and you do this for me, and it creates a bond. these were just independent of each other. Then you had lots of books on sex and touch and affection, and then we had older studies from, you guys remember the Harry Harlow studies with the rhesus monkeys, and he separated the monkeys at birth and raised them all alone without any kind of physical interaction or touch, and they developed all kinds of strange, problems and illnesses, you might say, and pathologies. And that was done in the 50s by Harry Harlow, and they have had lots of studies ever since, all showing how touch is so important in both child development, but also then there's all the sexual studies. I found that these 5 areas, commitment, mutual reliance, kind of reciprocity, meeting each other's needs, trust, how you believe in somebody, how you feel a sense of trust, how you get to know people, communication, intimacy. These were major categories, but nobody had put them together and said, you know what? They're pieces of the whole. They're just pieces of the whole. And so I developed a theory and a model to portray my theory that said, listen, a relationship consists of or made up of 5 major bonds that humans connect on. And these are, if they understand them, then they can be much more intentional. They can be much more involved in actually running their relationships. They have a job description. This is my relationship. This is what I'm running. And they can think about it. And in fact, these levels are ranges. They're not all or nothing. Either you know somebody or you don't. There's some level, and they fluctuate. So people can start profiling what's going on in their relationship. So now they can even think about what's happening and what's going on. I'll just give you a quick example on how all of these on their own are bonding, and then when we start actually putting them together, we get the big picture. But let me start with no. I'm sure some of you, when you came back at the end of summer, or if you weren't here all summer doing something, you meet people and you start talking and you start sharing some things and you start getting to know somebody. And it starts creating a bond. We had 2 guys up here giving a massive greeting to each other before. If you guys were here when they came in, jumping on top of each other, totally in love, way up here. And they hadn't seen each other for a while. They're like, dude, I haven't seen you, man. Come here, give me a hug, right? Knowing each other, right? Knowing somebody is kind of potential bonding. It's how we connect. We start to find an affinity, as it were. So I'll give you a quick example. A number of years ago, I was flying to do a presentation someplace, and it was when I was living in Ohio. And I sat down on the airplane, and this woman gets on, and she was going to sit next to me, it appeared. And she just had all these packages. So she was like shoving packages, under the seat and up in the bin. And honestly, she was probably in her early 60s. She looked kind of manic, like hyper. And so she's shoving all these packages, and it was, I'll be honest, it was a little entertaining for me, so I was just kind of watching her. You know how you do that, have people watch? And she sits down and looks at me, and I go, oh, hey, are you from Cleveland, going to visit somewhere, or are you, were you visiting in Cleveland? Because it looked like she had been shopping. She had all these presents, like, everybody goes to Cleveland to shop, right? So anyway, she's like, well, we're flying to St. Louis, by the way. She goes, I'm going to St. Louis, which is where I raised my family and I used to live, and my kids live there, and all my grandbabies, and had to work in Cleveland, so my job took me out of St. Louis, and so I hardly ever get back to see them, and I'm going for 2 full weeks, and I got all these presents for my grandbabies, and I can't wait to see them. I'm just going to live 24/7, spending every waking moment with my grandbabies. And she starts rummaging through her purse for what? For pictures, right? Yeah, I should say on her phone. Well, it was on her. She pulls out a photo album. So she goes, let me show you my family. I'm like, okay, sounds great. Got a 2-hour flight. So literally, I'm not kidding. 30 minutes, she's going through this photo. This is like some big, thick photo. I don't know why she was taking it with her. So the no is going what direction? But I want you to see what, relationships are, kind of a 2-way street, aren't they? I know you and you know me, but what's the direction of the no? just one way. So I'm getting to know her. So I'm doing what you would probably do. You know, I'm being polite, and it is interesting at first. You know, it's a beautiful family she's got. And I'm doing what I call bobblehead listening. Did you ever do that? So everybody show me bobblehead listening. I want you to do this for the next 30 minutes. That was me. After a while, I'm like in a trance. You know? Did you ever talk to somebody, they talk so much that you don't even want to talk anymore? You forgot how to talk. It's just gone. You're just bobbing. And she gets done, you know, and I'm still bobbing. And then I realized, stop. So at that moment, it's really awkward. She's like, oh my, we're up flying now. I mean, she went through the announcements and everything. She says, I'm so embarrassed. You know, I don't even know your name, and I just showed you my whole family. And so I said, it's true. I said, I'm John Van Epp, and she goes, so are you from? I said, well, I'm from this area, and I'm going to St. Louis, and I'm working with a graduate class. I'm going to a university, and I actually wrote a program that I'm going to teach them to teach. It's a train-the-trainer program. So I teach them in their graduate program, and then they go out and they teach it. She goes, oh, what is it, like a business course? I'm like, no, it's a relationship course. It's got a funky name, not real academic. She goes, well, what's it called? I go, what this time? I said, called How to Avoid Marrying a Jerk. She's like, oh my gosh. Where were you when I needed you? I've been married 5 times. Let me tell you about my first husband. Do you see where I'm going with this? When we get up to deplane, to get off the airplane, what do you think she does before we say, when we're saying our goodbyes? That's right. So I'll just make it crooked because I didn't hug her back. Yeah, there are some people that, you know, you just start to realize they don't have a lot of criteria for falling in love. She only required a guy to do what? Exactly, which is what I had been doing for 2 hours. So I'm like, yikes, I'm not giving her my card or nothing. No contact. This is what I'm just trying to say to you. Listen, we could take this whole hour and take each one of these and talk about how they are major sources of bond on their own. But I'm telling you, you put them together and you start to have a profile of what goes on between you and another person. There's a range of how much you know about that other person and how much they know about you. And it's not just what they know about you, it's they know about who you are inside, how you think, how you sort things through, how do you solve problems, make decisions, stuff about your history and your past. There's a ton of stuff that falls into this know. But knowing and trusting are different, aren't they? In fact, I'm going to suggest to you that you can use this model to help pace how to develop a brand new relationship, okay? And it simply goes like this. Don't want to get ahead of myself. When you're developing a new relationship, don't let one level get a lot higher than the previous. Can you know somebody just a little bit and trust them a lot? Well, I'm not saying should you. Can you? It's what they do over at Western College all the time. No, so can you rely on somebody that you don't know or trust? Can you just see how it looks risky? Can you become committed, invested, involved beyond what you know or trust? Can this happen? This is a litmus test of honesty right here, okay? I don't really understand. What is he saying? Touch is higher. Huh. Oh, what does that mean? Okay. You can start, once you start getting into the details of each of these areas and understanding what goes there, you can start understanding how to build a relationship in what I call a zone that keeps your heart working with your head. Your head and your heart are really meant to work together. But we do relationships in many ways where the heart starts to go too fast in one area or another, and next thing you know, the bonds of the heart are overriding the judgment of the mind. So let me give you just a little more of a detail, and we'll talk about how the head and the heart should work together. So let's talk about trust. Trust does not equal what you know about somebody, right? You can know somebody a lot and trust them what? Very little, right? Trust, technically, is how you take what you know about somebody and organize it into some kind of a picture in your mind. So I'm going to give you a definition that trust is your feeling of confidence and security and safeness with somebody. I trust you. I feel safe with you. I feel confident. I feel at ease with you. It's this feeling that comes from what you believe about this person. So it isn't technically what you know, because you might know very little and be filling in all the gaps into your mind. But it's like a picture in your head. It's like you created this mental representation. So to really understand this, kind of as an example, let me give you, for those, do we have any psych majors in the room? I know we got one there. Any other? Raise your hand high. Don't be ashamed. It's not that you're in psychology because you have issues. No, that's not true. It's because you want to help people. That's what drives. And you like playing detective and figuring things out. That's what a lot of psychology is about, is helping people and figuring things out. Welcome back. So let me give you something from the classroom for a minute, okay? So let me just bring the classroom in here. I promise it will be enjoyable. Object relations theory. So attachment theory said that people form attachments, and this was usually focused on like newborns and infants and toddlers. They form attachments through what they called mental representations. An offshoot of all of that research and theory and everything was a branch called object relations theory. Object relations theory just says kind of this in a nutshell. When a baby is born, it does not have images to represent things outside of himself or herself. So we'll call those objects. Even mother is an object. So facial recognition, like when the little 1-month-old smiles, it's not because they recognize your face. Oh, they recognize me. It's probably because they're, I don't know, got gas or pooing or something. But they're not smiling because they don't have, we function by matching. I see your face and I match it with a picture in my mind. So you remember that Adam Sandler, Drew Barrymore movie, 50 First Dates? Anybody ever catch that one? Aw, sweet movie. Right, she had brain damage from an accident. So from the accident on, every time she woke up, all of the things that, all of her mental representations from the accident to the present were erased. So she formed mental representations through the day, went to sleep, woke up, didn't have any more. So she wouldn't recognize somebody that she met yesterday because she couldn't match it with a picture. Well, theorists would say that's what infants have when they're first born in this world. They don't have pictures. They're kind of blank slate in their mind. And then around 3-4 months, they start to form some tentative images to represent pictures and objects in the world. And as they're doing that, they're moving toward what is called object permanency. So objects now are permanent. So like a little infant, 2 months, don't chew on the water bottle. All you need to do is take the water bottle out. They won't go looking for the water bottle. You can play this little game with infants. Just hide something. They won't look for it because they don't have a picture in their mind to represent. Out of sight, you fill it in. Out of sight? Got it? So the fun game that we play when object permanency is first setting in is when, I played this with my little grandson, Roy. Let's see, in fact, I've got, that's Effie. And she's my granddaughter. She's now a little older than that picture. She's 4, and this is little Roy. Yeah, he's a sweetheart. He's such a nice little boy. And when he was around 4 or 5 months, I'd be like, hey, Roy, where's Pa's head? Where's Pa's head? And what do you say? Peekaboo, right? Did you ever see the infant? They'll be sitting in their little high chair, and you go, where's my head? Where's my head? Peekaboo, they go like this. Did you ever see them do that? You know what that is? Trauma. You just traumatized a little kid. You basically cut your head off, like decapitated yourself. Think how gross this is. Cut my head off. Where's my head? You can hear me but can't see me. Here I am. You're like, and if Roy could have spoke, he would have been like, Pa, please don't do that again. But I'm like, I'm going to do it over and over and over. So listen, from around 4 months, 5 months old to the present day, you relate to people through a picture in your head. You get to know some little thing about somebody, and you start to construct an image in your mind to represent them. You relate to the representation in your mind. And early in a relationship, it's very common for the representation to develop a lot faster than the true knowing. Does this make sense? Not if it makes sense, just indulge me. No bobblehead nodding, just true, genuine, heartfelt nod. Go. Oh, nice. Got a shiver. So listen, what am I saying? I'm saying that we oftentimes build a relationship with the Facebook version of somebody. You know? You start to get to know them and you fill in and you check them out. I mean, do you guys ever Google anybody? Check them out? Do you ever go on there, you kind of get to know somebody's name? I told people at 3 o'clock, there's an interesting app that, I don't know where it is in the development because I kind of lost touch with it, but it's been around for a few years, and they've been working at it. And what it does is that it's called Highlight. You ought to check it out. You can go on YouTube and see the author of Highlight do an interview and talk about this app. But let me just tell it to you real quick. So on the app, you get you sign in, you put your information, and it takes all your social media stuff, and it just puts it all into your profile. So everybody on the app, it's just pulling in and it's chunking and organizing with algorithms all of their social media stuff. And then you just leave it in the background. And when you get around somebody, that something in their social media and something in their profile matches something in your profile, ding, it dings. You just pull your phone out. You'll be like, really? Interesting. And you know everything about them. You know their name and all their media, right? Social dating apps have been called now for a number of years no longer dating apps, like Tinder and all those. I know you guys don't use those, but like these kind of apps, they're now called social discovery apps. And this is where we're heading. We're going into real time. We don't need to talk to get to know each other. We can do it all. And just what I would say is that it's always been a little bit difficult to figure out how to get to know somebody, but your trust picture, your representation, now getting fed from all kinds of social media as well as just a little bit of interaction with them, the real person can be radically different than the Facebook image, right? So I just want to suggest to you, you need to be responsible for how you are constructing a representation of this person. And it needs to come from genuine knowing them. The digital know doesn't equal the experiential know. I don't know if you can read that. People tell me I look like Brad Pitt, is what he says. Well, I mean, we get that. But, even in just relationships, when you're getting to know somebody, there needs to be kind of this experiential know. So, key areas to get to know. What are they? So, just so you understand, my book has 10 core chapters. 5 of them are on each of these 5 areas. So we have a whole chapter on what trust is, whole chapter on rely and how to meet each other's needs and what that means and how to pace that in a relationship. And a big concept that I have in my book when it comes to this model is people need to learn to pace relationships better. We pace relationships really poorly. And what the second main part of the book are 5 key areas to get to know, which are based on those premarital predictors of marital outcomes. So I took all of these hundreds of research articles, I organized them, and I said, let's put this in everyday language, that these are key areas, they're target areas to talk about and to explore. So I put them in an easy to remember acronym, FACES. And so the first area to get to know is stuff about somebody's family. How many of you were born from two parents? Oh, there you go. See there. We all have something in common. We all had some kind of upbringing. And lots of what we do in our relationships, how we think, how we interact about things, how we talk about stuff, is reflected from what happened in our families and our upbringing. And I don't use family as just one type of family. You might have been a single-parent family, might have been a two-parent family, might have been a foster home. My wife grew up with adopted parents. Could have been any number of family constellations. But what we all have in common is that we all were born and we all grew up. And in that process, lots of things came into our lives, into our hearts and minds, that we need to think about. So at your age, it's key to talk about this stuff when you're in these, quote, dating relationships. I think that people are afraid to talk about their family stuff, like ask questions like, what were you like in your family, and what was your family like, and what did they do? Because they start to feel like that's premarital. I think that we've made a huge mistake to say, these topics to talk about are only when you are here. And if you talk about them, obviously you're too serious. Man, I remember when I was in high school, I was going out with this girl, liked her a lot. Major family issues. Why? Well, because a year before I started going out with her, a year and a half or so, her one brother died in a motorcycle accident, an older brother. And months after that, the grieving other brother, there were 4 kids, 2 sisters and 2 brothers, 2 girls, 2 boys. The other brother, grieving, went out and committed suicide. So I'm going out with a girl that's got, within the last 2 years, a brother that died in a motorcycle accident and a brother that committed suicide, and she rides a motorcycle. And she was as closed as can be. She didn't want to talk about anything, which I can kind of look back and understand. But my point is that I can remember sitting around in our relationship and asking her questions about her family. I think if we do relationships better in dating, they become places where we talk about stuff that helps us to grow as people. They're not just, out to get us locked in and lose all of our freedom. They're really frameworks, ultimately, that God designed to help you develop and mature as a person. And if dating relationships are not producing that, then we're not doing them right. If you think about the scriptures and kind of like a theology of relationships, what we read in the scriptures is what Jesus says, listen, relationships are the framework that hung all of the Old Testament. All of the commandments and prophets hang on love God and love others, this understanding of relationships. So I think if you start to look at how you're doing dating relationships, a good litmus test is, are my dating relationships helping me to grow and be a better person? Are they helping the other person to grow and be a better person? Whether we stay together or not, and are we pacing our relationship well? So one of the things that we do in the program version is that we have people work on a family tree. So, what do you want to repeat? What do you not want to repeat? And what things do you want to revise from how you grew up? I don't know if you've ever done that, but just those 3 questions will help you out tremendously. Any of you ever worked on that? Like, what do I want to repeat? What do I not want to repeat? And in terms of my adult relationships and ultimately my, personal type, familial type relationship, dating and everything. What do I want to repeat? What do I not repeat? Anybody ever done this? Okay, so a few of you. So I was fortunate because when I was growing up, some of these things that weren't taught to me just seemed to happen. So I'll tell you a real quick personal story. So I was 15, and my mom had been diagnosed with cancer about 3 years prior. And the surgeons tried to get it out. It didn't go well, and she ended up passing away when I was 15. So my generation raised a lot of you guys. So my daughter's 30, my oldest is 35 and 31. And so, my generation was raising those of you who are in your 20s and 30s. And my father's generation was either in the Korean War, so some of your parents had parents in the Korean War, or in my dad's case, he fought in World War II. So my dad was this type where he was a good guy, loving, very, very loyal to his family, but he was not real expressive of love and affection. I mean, he wasn't the type to go give you a hug or say, I love you. I don't ever remember him saying, I love you when I was growing up. But my mother was more expressive. So when my mom died, it was just my dad and I, and we grew up in Ohio. I grew up in Ohio, and my older siblings, I had 4 older siblings, and they were all either in college or married. And so it was just my dad and I in this 5-bedroom, old farmhouse. And my mom died on the first day of school, so in the fall, obviously. And by winter, I just remember as a young boy feeling this loss of connection. I mean, we didn't talk about mom's death. Any grieving I did alone. I didn't talk to anybody about it. I had my own kind of almost like a little ritual I did as a 15, 16, 17-year-old boy. You grieve for a long time when a parent dies. But I felt this lack of connection, the lack of bond, because the expression of love and affection was kind of missing between my father and I. And so I'm like, I want to try to get that connection. So I think I'll do something. So I plotted out how to get my dad to say, I love you. Sounds kind of silly, but I figured, okay, when I'm going to get ready to go to bed, I'm going to tell my dad I love him, and that'll put the pressure on him, and he'll have to repeat it back. And he'll say it. So I said, Dad, I'm going to go to bed now, and I'll never forget he was reading the newspaper, and he looks over the newspaper, and he goes, all right, John, good night. I said, hey, I want to say something before I go to bed. He goes, what's that? I go, Dad, I love you. Well, at that moment, he got this look like that was really awkward. And he goes, me too. Now, I don't know what that would mean to you, but to me it meant I love my dad and he loves himself too. Something's not right here. What about me? It was so weird and awkward. I didn't go to him, and the family changed quickly. My dad met a woman, and within what I call the 90-day probation period, 3 months, he married her, which was kind of a whole set of interesting stories I could tell you about that I'm not going to tonight. But my senior year, right when I was about ready to graduate, I actually put my faith in Christ. And I started to attend a place of worship where a lot of the guys not only said I love you, but they gave big hugs and things. And it looked strange to me at first. I thought, well, they're all weird in this church. But I started to like it. And in a very short amount of time, I said, that's the kind of man that I'd like to be, a man that isn't inhibited about just expressing himself. So when I went off to college, I would, reach out to shake my dad's hand, and then I'd pull him in, I'd give him a big bear hug. And I'd be like, Dad, I love you. And he'd like, me too. And off I'd go to college. Well, I'd come home expecting him to reach out to give me, but he'd always reach out to shake my hand. I'd be like, yeah, bring it in. And I'd give him a big bear hug, say, Dad, I love you. Well, I just never stopped, I just lived to make him uncomfortable. So as the years went on, my father began to say, not only I love you too, he started to just say, John, I love you. He actually used my name when he said it, which is much more meaningful and personal. One of the last memories of him in my home, he had some Parkinson's, and that you either shake or you get all stiff. And I remember he walked into my house, and he saw me at the other end, and as he came in, he put his arms out, and he started shuffling toward me. And like 30 minutes later, we hugged. Not really. I went over and gave him a big hug. But what I want you to think about is there are lots of things that you grew up with that you're like, I want to repeat that. This is part of my values. This is important to me. This is something that I really enjoyed about how my family got along, or how they solved a problem, or how they argued, or how they expressed their emotion. But you may have a lot of things you're like, I want to revise that. I want to make that a little different. This is the time to think about it and talk about it. And dating relationships should allow this kind of conversation to occur. I think that we don't really get to know the real stuff of who we are in our dating culture today. I think we're really missing that. We just stay surfacey. When we text, what do we text about? What's happening in the moment? So all we know is people in bubbles, and we don't get to know the whole person. I think we need to reclaim the getting to know process. Let me talk just for a minute or two about the conscience. I'm watching my time, and I want to be careful of it. I think it's very important to get to know somebody's conscience. But I found that hardly anybody teaches us how to figure out the conscience. So is the conscience important to figure out? What do you think, yes or no? Yes. Absolutely. Don't marry that guy. So how can you figure out the maturity of somebody's conscience? Well, give me a shout out. What exactly is the conscience? Let's try to define it for a minute. What would you say the conscience is? A moral compass. Oh, I like that. That's really good. What's another idea that somebody has about what the conscience is? The little voice in your head. This may not be politically correct, but if you take medicine for those little voices, don't stop. There's a difference. Yeah, but it's like how we reflect on what we're doing. And we say, oh, that's good or that's bad. Did you ever have a moment where you were talking, and as you were talking, your conscience said, stop talking? Did you ever have that? Sometimes we don't follow it. Sometimes we're like, no, I'm not going to stop talking. I want to keep talking. And then later we regret it, and we have guilt and remorse. But the conscience is a self-observing capacity. I believe it's a God-given capacity to step out of yourself and observe yourself and make judgments according to your moral code. So if you have a good moral code, the question is, are you good at enforcing that moral code? Does your conscience have a good enforcer? The word conscientious brings another meaning to the idea of the conscience, because what does it mean if I say, oh, I'm dating somebody and she's so conscientious? I've been going through a tough time, but she's really conscientious. She's really what? Sensitive, aware, intentional, thoughtful, empathetic. So I think the conscience is the ability to get out of yourself, to watch what you're doing, and also to think about how what you're doing is affecting somebody else. How is that making that person feel? Oh, don't say that. Or go up there and say this to this person. It'll make them feel good. The conscience helps to enforce what is right, what is good. It's your moral compass based on a moral code and based on other people. Empathy. So, let me give you a quick example of how I think you can figure out somebody's conscience. I think that it takes time, and you've got to see people in different circumstances, so you've got to be together with them. And if you give it time and you pace relationships slower than what we do, so I think that we've got to create a way to have a lot of our relationships right in here. And we got to keep this like the safe zone, like we said, not going higher than right in there, or it just creates this contradiction. We're doing this, and we're only in here, and I don't know. It doesn't feel like it is in harmony. It doesn't feel like it makes sense. So if we keep this here, and we build a lot more relationship here for weeks and months, then I think you can figure out people's consciences fairly well. So I'm going to give you a quick story about my oldest daughter. So she's married, happy with kids, like I told you. I showed you her kids already. And but when she was a teenager, she went out with this guy, and it was a first date. So I don't know. Do you guys even do dates anymore? You're just like, hey, what are you doing? Nothing. Why don't you come over? what is that? Is that a date? Is that a hang? Is that like a hookup? I don't know what it is. Should I shower? Should I brush my teeth? Why? What's going on? Just hanging. Oh, gosh, it doesn't help me at all now. So, I think we need definition for what we're doing. That's this area. But anyway, back then, this millennial, when she was going to go out on a date, she got herself all ready. She got picked up. She went to the movie, dinner and a movie. Okay? She comes home, and when she comes in, she's like soaking wet. Well, it had started to rain. It wasn't raining when she first left, but it started to rain. And we're like, what the heck? Why are you soaking wet? She goes, let me tell you what happened. She's like all ticked off. I'm like, okay, yeah, sit down, quick. So that's a lot of what happens in the Van Epp family. We always had all these debriefing. It was great for my wife and I, as well as for our kids. Always talked about everything, could never get enough of talking. She goes, we go to the movie, and we come out of the movie. Of course, he had to park far away because we got there a little bit late. We get into the movie, and we come out, and it's pouring down rain, and we're standing at the door, and I'm looking at it rain, and I look at him, and he looks at me, and I think he gets me until he speaks. And he says, hey, I'll race you to the car. So, okay, it's kind of obvious what my daughter was hoping, right? I'd go get the car. So she's good-hearted, so she runs to the car. Now, I would just say most of us would. We wouldn't be like the dominating jerk. Like, hey, go get the frickin' car, you dumb. Okay? We wouldn't do that. We'd be like, okay, I'll race you to the car. I hate this, but I'll do it anyway. Right? Because we're good-hearted. Just join in. Go with the flow. It is what it is. She gets to the car, goes to open the door. It's locked. So now she's getting soaked. The light comes on, which means what? He's getting in. So she cleans and looks in. And what do you think he's doing in the car? Yeah, a lot of people say laughing. Like it was all a big plot. Like he's like, ha, ha, ha. Getting a little wet out there, aren't you, slowpoke? He's totally out of touch with what's going on outside the car. He's combing his hair. All right. I don't know if you can see this real well, but let me just ask you a quick question. Big deal or little deal? What would you say, big deal or little deal? You guys are judgmental. All right, now, what I want to emphasize is what feels like a big deal today starts to become less of a big deal tomorrow. We start rationalizing. So this was on a Friday. So by Monday, when my daughter went back to school and she saw him, he didn't say anything. She didn't go to confront him. It just seemed like it was like, really? You're going to be this, you're this, like, take care of me Kate type, gotta go get the car. So by a couple weeks later, when she was getting ready to go out, and I said, what are you doing? And she said, going out. And I said, with whom? And she said his name. Do you understand what that does to you as a father? Can I just talk to you about, like, as fathers? Someday, some of you may be a parent, but a lot of you will be parents someday. Get a hobby. It's very, very stressful raising people. I got a hobby because of this situation. I went into gun collecting. It was I don't know why I picked that hobby. What I want to tell you is that many people, love is blind. She was attracted to this guy. She thought she was making a big deal out of a little deal. So she began to reverse it. But this is what I want you to see. Time and togetherness. So we hung in there with her. We went along with her. We talked about things. And she kept relationship in a good zone. So all of that was working for her. But as time went on, another little deal happened, and then another little deal. And it wasn't getting caught in the rain or racing to the car, but they were the little deals eventually began to add up. And what did they add up to reveal? Exactly. I'm going to call it a major theme of the conscience. She began to understand how his conscience worked. So there were some times, you know, if you want to get a little more specific, that she actually, as a 16-year-old girl, she sat down with this boy who was 17, and she said, hey, this bothers me when you do this. I just don't think it's being very thoughtful. So she was doing the right thing. She was trying to be nice. She put up with stuff, and then periodically she would bring it up and talk about it. And she measured his changeability because after about 4 or 5 months, it became clear this boy's conscience is not what I really want in somebody, and he's not changing. He doesn't take any ownership. He doesn't see anything. It's always my agenda working on his. I need to step out of this and move on.com. You get it? So, I can't talk about all the other areas to get to know. And you probably are shocked that I didn't even get into this whole topic of how to build relationships in safe ways and the fact that many of us are doing it backwards, you know. I didn't know if you ever noticed that the word touch has ouch in it. Ouch. Touch can be painful. But I just want to kind of put a couple things out, and then I'll wrap up so we can take about 15 minutes of questions. So be thinking about what you'd like to ask. So you're not like, I don't know, let me think about it. Okay? When it comes to sex, any kind of physical touch, I just want you to know that not only in our, that's called social psych, so in the social studies, you know, studies from social psychology as well as psychology, we know that interactions that are physical interactions, particularly of sexual nature and sexual arousal, they create bonds. The idea that you can take sexual touch out of relationship and have it exist like what we're doing in the norm of a hookup defies what we know in the social science research. It also defies what we know in biology. When we start to get aroused, the brain produces these chemicals, in particular, oxytocin, dopamine, and vasopressin. How many of you have heard of any of these chemicals? You're like, yeah, I know oxytocin. I take that for my back problems. No, that's Oxycontin. Stop it. Don't take that stuff. It leads to heroin. So, oxytocin, chemical in the brain. Vasopressin. So I'm kind of aware of my time, so I want to be careful. But I would just say it's interesting. Vasopressin interacts with testosterone to create this sense of, you know, I can't stop thinking about you, almost like an addiction. All right? So in animals that mate for life, they find that vasopressin is a key chemical in the brain related to arousal, related to how they function. They mate for life, these animals that do that. And in some of the experiments that have been done, where they have stopped the production of vasopressin, those males, because it interacts with, it's in both males and females, but it interacts with testosterone, sort of, it affects males more than females. They began to play the field and stop being faithful to the partner that they had. So social scientists and biologists are like, this is an interesting chemical. It operates in the brain. It's activated during the sexual arousal. And with a male interacting with testosterone, it makes them like, I can't stop thinking about you. I want to be back together with you. Does that sound like it makes sense to you? So that's one example that sexual touch is bonding. Now, it seems humorous to me. Pharmaceutical companies are going to get a hold of this somehow. You know? They make a little pill. And wives will put it in their husband's coffee, right? Here, have a cup of coffee, honey. Yeah, it's a little bit. Just drink it. I can't stop thinking about you all day. Yeah, I know. Have another cup. Bloop, bloop. I don't know. We've already created sprays of oxytocin. Oxytocin is produced at high levels. And does anybody know the history of the study on oxytocin? Started with birthing, that when, if you ever watch an old black and white movie, and see a woman give birth to a baby. When she gives birth, first of all, what does the room look like that she's giving birth in? You never watched old black and white movies. Okay, so I'll just tell you. Looks like a sterile clinical surgery room. And the doctors all have masks on, and it's very clinical. And when the baby comes out, they immediately do what with the baby? They cut the cord, and usually turn it upside down, make sure it's breathing, and then they take it out. And you would see in that movie her and her partner or husband or whatever it would be, the father of the child, walking later. She'd be in a bathrobe, and they'd walk down the hallway of the hospital to this big glass, and they'd look into the nursery looking for their baby. She hasn't even touched it. All these hospital procedures changed when Case Western Reserve did massive studies, and then it's got duplicated all around the world on if the baby has skin-to-skin interaction with the mother, immediately after birth, there is a bond that increases that in 5-year studies showed some differences between how the baby and the mother interact and how they feel. Postpartum depression was less. Babies crying was less. Colic was less. How they interacted, their eye contact, all these things they found even 5 years later from that one initial sense of bond that was skin to skin. The reason why is this. When a mom is given birth, as she's giving birth, her oxytocin levels run up around 7-9 times more than what is normal, maybe even 12 times. It all depends on what study you look at. So it's like huge amount of oxytocin, and it puts her in a state ready to bond. So that's where it all began. But how it came into the sex studies is that they found that when women are aroused and particularly engaging in sexual activity, and their arousal is peaking, their oxytocin levels are almost the same height. And so they are in a state of bonding. And as soon as they have skin to skin, it starts to create a bond. Now, men also have oxytocin. These chemicals are in males and females. They don't have quite the same height of levels, but they have anywhere from 6 to 7 times the amount of oxytocin going when they're sexually active. My point is this. If you think that you can engage in the sexual act and not be putting yourself into a state of bonding, you are defying nature. That's not how we were designed. So in terms of sexual addictions and sexual studies, and you got a whole thing on pornography, which is going to be very interesting to see what they say about this, they find that we can actually, the plasticity of the brain, we can start rewiring our brain to not bond. But that creates all kinds of potential problems down the road. You need to honor how your body is designed. And so I would say to you, listen, we need to define how to date with less pressure. Just because we're exclusive don't mean we're going to go get married. And just because we've been going, together, we're with each other for the last 6 months, doesn't mean we're going to be with each other for the next 60 years. This is just what's going on. We need to define a place to have relationships where we can talk about stuff. We can explore things. Where we can say, listen, man, we're going to have this level of contact, but we're not going to go any further. We're going to hold back. The studies about sex find this, that those that hold back on sexual activity, every study that looks at people that hold back on sexual activity finds that they have long-term benefits. It just makes common sense. The sooner they have sex, 2010 research article found that they had lower ratings in their marriage quality. So they looked at married couples and rated their marriage relationship, the quality, their satisfaction in lots of different areas, and then they just said, how soon did you guys have sex in your relationship? Well, the ones that waited longer had higher marriage qualities. The one that had sex sooner had lower marriage qualities. It just makes sense. If you hold off here and you just keep this right here for a long time, what are you actually working on in your relationship? You're doing something, so what are you working on? Getting to know the person, talking about stuff that's a little more meaningful than maybe the initial texts that are going on, really building a deeper trust, a belief in the person, looking at how you meet each other's needs. You're developing patterns that carry on not only in that relationship, But I think they're going to become patterns that you're going to duplicate and carry on in any relationship you establish. They found that the more sexual partners correlated in a 4-country study with higher rates of infidelity, but that just kind of makes sense too. The more I'm just kind of giving in to sexual activity with different people, I kind of develop the ability to just kind of step and have sex with somebody. So don't think that marriage is going to completely protect you. You know, your habits help to protect you even more than the status of being married. And then another one that was really interesting is the more sexual partners and living together, which is so normative now, and it seems to make so much common sense to people, produce higher risks of divorce. And this article that I cited this morning called Does Premarital Cohabitation Predict Subsequent Marital Stability and Marriage Quality, a meta-analysis. They looked at almost 1,000 research studies. This is not a religious article. And I put this quote in here because it sounded almost like the Surgeon General's warning about smoking. The major practical implication of this review is psychologists can inform the public that despite popular belief, premarital cohabitation is generally associated with negative outcomes, both in terms of marital quality and marital stability in the United States. It's a very, very interesting statement after the review of about 1,000 research articles. Well, don't read that. Ignore it. So listen, this is what I want to say. Choices that you make in your relationships. I think that we have so much individual freedom. You have so much opportunity to kind of chart things out. There's so few norms. It's like what that end of courtship article in New York Times was saying. Wow, you know, this is a blessing. It's wonderful that you have all this. But you have got to define what is your game plan for relationships. If you don't define your game plan, society isn't defining it for you. And if you let just, you know, what is, you know, what happens will happen. What is meant to be will be. You will not be intentional. And that word kept coming up here when we talked, and I asked questions about things. You won't be running your relationship. So I think it's so important for us to see the importance of running the relationship. So I'm going to move real fast, and I'm just going to remind you that if you like this material, you think it's valuable, it's not, you know, we're trying to give it at a real low cost, but you can get, you know, an online course, you can do stuff, and you can help to kind of devise your own personal plan for how you want to build relationships with the head and the heart working together. It's going to be a tremendous benefit for you to do that before the relationship actually begins. Don't wait until you're in a relationship to figure out what you're going to do in relationships. Relationships need to be following templates that you pre-consider and pre-contemplate. It will help you out tremendously. And knowing target areas to talk about and get to know and how predictive they are empowers you tremendously. So what questions do we have? Yes, sir. Which one? It's so far back. There it is. Yes.
You talked a lot about how we need to slow down the timeline of relationships, but you never gave like any specifics about it. Can you be a bit more specific about?
Yeah, I kind of intentionally left that out. So just leave you hanging. Because people argue, as soon as you start giving that, they feel like you are dictating what they're supposed to do. So I'll give you just a couple rules of thumb, just guidelines, okay? You've got to determine your own guideline. But I would argue strongly or emphasize strongly that the range of commitment has been whittled down to no commitment and a hookup, all right? So we got no strings attached, nothing going on here. This is just for enjoyment, all right? And then there is, we are a couple, and if that goes on just a little bit of time, we are basically pre-engaged. And I think that mindset, and particularly for people that are more serious-minded, all of a sudden, it's like, you know, man, stay away from them because, you know, as soon as you step in, it's like the trap, you know, you know, you're in it. I think we've got to create a much looser acceptance of what we'll call like exclusive romantic friendships. Because after 40 years of marriage, the one thing I can tell you that is most important in a marriage is you got to be good friends. I mean, you got to have skills, you got to do a lot of things, you got to run your relationship, you can't just let it run itself, but you got to be good friends. So developing that at the front end is so, I think, so huge. And you may want to get out. So a general rule of thumb is what I call the 90-day probation period. And this would make sense if you think about it. I think you can only get to know somebody, truly get to know them to about here in the first 90 days. And the reason why is because of time and togetherness. You cannot have enough situations happen to see what this person is like. Like, is it important to see how somebody treats you when they get mad at you? Right? So, maybe you should all get people mad at you on the first date. Piss them off. That won't work, though, will it? Because you can't manufacture these things. You can't see how somebody handles stress or how they handle, you got to have multiple situations of togetherness. So there's a lot of research on how habits are formed, and most everything revolves around, and how addictions are broken. A lot of these things show that right around a third month, these things are starting to either get established or be revealed. And so I think that that's a good rule of thumb. I'm going to keep all my levels relatively low for at least 3 months. Because we may not be going out with anybody else. We may just be focused on our relationship. But I'm going to keep a balance of what's going on. This is so contrary to how people do relationships. People jump in, completely. There's a lot of aversion to commitment now because it becomes so interruptive to, my own self-development. It feels like I am putting myself at risk if I'm in this relationship because it's going to make demands on me that are going to, direct me in a way that is not for my own good, and I need to focus on myself. And we get those messages all around us. So I say 90 days. If we don't create more space here, then none of this pacing will work. We've got to create space. So we've got to be willing to do that. I would say a lot of people, after a year, they really start seeing things in the second year that they didn't see in the first in serious relationships. So I don't know what it is. Maybe it's just the first year is the first, it's the first of everything, first birth. It's the first of all the calendar type things. I don't know if that was it, but I've heard over and over and over, and I don't know what data supports that. What other questions we got? Yeah.
So you talked about a 90-day probation period. Is that 90 days of dating or like 90 days of when you first start getting to know them? Like say if you were friends before you started dating?
Yeah, I would kind of put it all in there. Like I said, I don't think you're going to have to decide what works for you because we're too individualized. So I'd be careful to say, okay, go. Talk. Come on, we're in the 90 days, we just started. Yeah, so I'd just be careful of this rigidity of a system. It's a rule of thumb, but it's saying, listen, you got to be in the relationship with sufficient time and togetherness to start to see things emerge and repeat, significant things. Because now you're getting to know the patterns of the person. We got like 3 minutes left. Yeah, so let me just clarify. I didn't mean that they all have to keep moving like in a straight. I just meant that if anything on the right side gets a lot higher than the left side, vulnerability and risk is going up. So it is possible. A lot of friendships are not, if this is romantic commitment, a lot of friendships don't have any romantic commitment, but they have a lot of this stuff going on. So this isn't risky per se. Because these things are working together. So what I was trying to say is make sure that as you're getting to know somebody, you are sorting through that picture in your mind and making sure that it matches what you know, and then you're testing that out in real life. Are they really there for you and so forth? And that's happening at a lower level of commitment. And it will get blurry is if you start getting sexualized in your relationship, overly sexualized. So it's not that when those levels go up here, you got to be here. I mean, I just want to be fair to, I mean, I know people that had convictions that they didn't want to kiss before they got married. So, I mean, there's a big range. But they would be at risk if they didn't have any kind of in-depth conversation about what they are as sexual beings and their sexual, if they're that serious in their relationship and they're heading toward marriage, they better talk about stuff in depth, even if they have boundaries there. Does that make sense? Okay. One more question. Everybody's always like the last question. Yeah. Oh, sorry. You're just waving at somebody. Yes, sir. Oh, that's a great question. Yes. I think some people can move too slow. I don't think that that's the norm of what's going on out there. I think the norm of what's going on out there is a lot of angst, a lot of anxiety, okay? So we're either just like saying, I don't want to get profane, but just like forget it. I'll just go have sex. I don't even want to think about this stuff. I got work to do, studies. I got to do my internship. I just need something tonight. Just go out and have a good time. So we either just kind of like go to that extreme, or the relationships, if we like somebody, all of a sudden they accelerate super fast. Okay? So the analogy I would give very quickly, and this is how I'll wrap up, is before we had GPSs on our phones, back when we used to use maps and stuff like that. So back in the dark ages, I remember driving, and I'd be on the highway, and I wasn't sure, like I'd be in Grand Rapids, and I was trying to find the entrance to the Prince Conference Center, and I did a U-turn, and then I did that with my GPS, actually, I don't know if you guys know, it's going around and around. My GPS is like, you're there. I'm like, I'm in the middle of the street with no turn anywhere. What do you mean I'm there? You are there. Bye. What? Start over. Before GPSs and all of that, there was this, when you didn't know where you were hyper vigilant looking at everything. So you're driving your car, like reading the signs and looking and trying to figure out do I get off here? Does this make sense? Can you imagine that? All right. When you don't know your location and where you are in relation to your destiny and all of that, you are full of anxiety, trying to figure things out. You're overly analytic, and you either turn your mind off and just be like, I'm not even going to think about it, or you're full of anxiety. I think if you have a way of evaluating, this is where I am, I see where I am, these are the things that I'm trying to get to know, this is how I'm kind of pacing my relationship, and maybe I even worked up some of my own time frames. This is what I'm going to do in this, in the first 5 to 6 months, in the first 2 months. I've worked out my own system. If I have my own GPS and I use this to help formulate it, I think you have way more relaxed experience in relationships. Because you kind of know where you are and you can figure out it. And you say, I know where I'm going and it's fine. I'm right where I'm supposed to be. But when you're not following that and you're just kind of like lost in that journey, I think that it creates all kinds of hardships for you. So I would encourage you to use your freedom responsibly. Just remember what Peter Parker was told by his uncle. With great power comes, with all this freedom that our wonderful society has given you, use it wisely. Thank you very much.